What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and happy Thanksgiving a day early. Technically, it's not until tomorrow, but if you're anything like me, you're gonna be filling your bellies full of food, you're gonna get the itis, you're gonna get a good night's sleep, and then you're gonna wake up bright and early on Friday and try to make it to those Black Friday sales. I know I am. I got my credit card paid off and everything. I'm ready to max this thing out. I'm gonna be painfully irresponsible with my financial life on Friday. But we are officially here with the actual main Spider-Verse event. Only took us like a month to get here. So all the lead up is done, right? Basically all the lead up is finished. We're in the main event now, the throes of Spider-Verse. And we pick up with Peter Parker as he is contacted at 6 a.m. by J. Jonah Jameson, who basically sends him over to Armstrong Park. And the reason why is that in Armstrong Park, there's just some guy out there causing all kinds of problems and ripping stuff up, only for us to find out that it's Morlun. Now, here's a crazy thing about this. Right off the bat, Peter doesn't recognize him. He doesn't know who he is. Instead, Morlun just kind of taunts him the same way that he always has, and saying like, we've done this on so many Earths across the multiverse, you know, and it's almost one of these things where he's like, where he kind of explains who he is, and Peter's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. We're not even on Earth. And in response, Morlun's like, I don't even know why I bother explaining this when all you guys do is die. And then he in turn just kills Spider-Man, only for us to find out that this is actually Earth 449. This is an alternate reality where humanity had basically colonized the moon and they live on the blue area of the moon. For those of you guys who don't know what that is, the blue area of the moon is the oxygen-rich area of the moon, right? Where you can really have entire bases of operations. The Watchers stayed there, the Inhumans lived there, Apocalypse, the X-Men villain, had a base of operations there for a while. It's been used by a lot of people. It was created by the Kree when they were working on creating the Inhumans on Earth, and it just stayed there ever since. But we end up switching back to what's basically Loom World, right? This is Earth 1. This is the base of operations for the Inheritors. This is where these guys operate out of. And again, they work directly with or really control the Master Weaver. Now remember, the Master Weaver is the guy who basically controls the gateway to alternate dimensions. The way this is depicted and the way that it's done, you have what's essentially called the Web of Life and Destiny. It's a really overly convoluted and complicated method of explaining the idea that the Master Weaver can basically allow people, or at least open a portal using the Web of Life and Destiny to transport anybody to any universe that's connected to the Web of Life and Destiny, right? So it's literally strands. Like, it looks like a giant web, but each one of these universes is basically represented as a strand as part of this web. So if you were to cut away a universe from this web and remove it, then it would be isolated from the rest of the multiverse. Now, one of the things that you guys are also going to notice over the course of the Spider-Verse event is that the Web of Life and Destiny will actually begin to shrink in size. And the reason why is because remember, while the whole of Spider-Verse is taking place, the events of Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers are going on. So universes are smashing into each other, they're being destroyed two at a time. It's just the collapse of everything, the end of everything. And it's a really, really cool depiction by Dan Slott in them to actually shrink the Web of Life and Destiny as the entire events of the incursions go on, showing us that the multiverse is getting smaller, universes are being destroyed. And of course, this leads to Morlun showing up here after basically consuming Spider-Man from Earth 449, and he's actually kind of teased by his brothers and sisters. Now, that's one of the things to know here is the Inheritor family is pretty prideful, and they're also just dicks, but it's also one of these things where they're exceedingly arrogant insofar as they're like, we're at the top of the food chain. And in a lot of ways they are. They really, really are, right? They're arrogant, but they can also back it up, right? Technically they feed, or they can feed on anything that is part of the animal totem, right? So any superhero that represents some aspect of the animal kingdom, like Panther, Spider-Man, anybody out there like that, they can feed on those individuals, but they prefer to feed on spiders. And in fact, they were directed by their father to feed on spiders and seemingly nothing else. So we'll actually get a motivation for that when we're introduced to the father of the Inheritors, because I'm gonna tell you right now, man, that dude is broken. God, he is so OP. It's nuts how cool he was. But the thing about this is his family basically knows he avoids Earth 616, right? He avoids the main Marvel universe, and they kind of tease him about it a little bit. And so at the same time, of course, you end up having Verna, who's basically one of the Inheritors, who assembles her Hounds. In reality, this is Dan Slott borrowing heavily from the events of Days of Future Past. And I would even go as far as to say that because of the fact that the Inheritors have existed across the multiverse, they probably came across Days of Future Past. For those of you guys who don't know know how that whole thing worked. With Days of Future Past, as we've talked about before, it was basically when things popped off, the mutants were considered a credible threat, and basically the Sentinel program was activated, became self-aware, and then conquered North America, and then basically set its sights on trying to conquer the world. But because Sentinels couldn't be everywhere, one of the things that they did is they created what were called Hounds, basically mutants tasked with tracking down other mutants. Rachel Summers was one of those, right? So now she's in the main Marvel Universe as part of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run, but when she originally appeared, she was initially a Hound. She was used by the Sentinels and even some humans before the total Sentinel takeover to basically hunt other mutants and bring them in. And so that's kind of where this seems to come from. As far as these Hounds go, what you have is Silver Sable, you've got Fireheart, and you've basically got Kraven the Hunter. They basically help Verna track down spider totems across the multiverse and then basically help her in her hunt. For some people and even other members of her family, it looks like it's just kind of cheating to a degree, that the nature of like hunting the spider totems should be done is like a solo act, but they've sort of moved beyond this being a sort of rite of testing or a rite of approval, and instead moved into the direction of like, now it's just for fun, right? It's just for sport, just kind of what they do. And so at that point, when Verna goes on her mission to find her spiders, you end up switching over to Peter Parker in the main Marvel Universe, right? Of course, again, he's met by the arrival of Silk. We talked about her before. The two of them can't stop banging. There's a reason for that. There's a really cool reason for that. The hierarchy and the role the spider totems play. For those guys who are a little curious or a little confused about the nature of spider totems, that will all become clear as we progress through the story, so don't worry. I'm not going to leave you hanging. Just kind of hang with me for a minute. But it's one of these things where Cindy Moon actually pitches the idea that because she's becoming more capable in terms of her role as a spider, that Peter Parker should like leave New York or even just leave Earth and like go to the moon or go somewhere else, right? It doesn't really matter. I mean, she's half joking here, but she's also half serious, because as long as the two of them operate in the same vicinity, they will be attracted to each other. Their hormones and really their role within the nature of the spider totem hierarchy will bring them together, and they will ultimately end up just ignoring everything and just procreating like rabbits again, right? But what you end up finding out here is that following the events of Spider Island, for those of you guys who remember that, when you had like the, everybody on the island of New York literally turning into a spider, that one of the things that Dr. Octopus had done when he was Superior Spider-Man is he had largely formed his own kind of spider army. What you ended up getting was actually a whole bunch of these criminals who just stole these suits and tech. They pretended to work for Spider-Man and then robbed a bank, which is actually not the most unintelligent thing to do. It's a pretty good plan. Now, of course, Peter Parker and Cindy Moon catch up to them, but while Peter Parker is trying to apprehend these guys, suddenly he's met by Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman, as well as Anya Corazon, and then Miguel O'Hara. Now, Jessica Drew, most of you guys know from Marvel Comics. You guys have heard of her, right? She's Spider-Woman, she's an Avenger, that kind of a thing. Miguel O'Hara, we just talked about in the previous video. Anya Corazon is somebody who's actually worth discussing here. So Anya Corazon's not really an actual spider person, meaning she wasn't really bitten by a radioactive spider per se. She's actually part of a group called the Spider Society, which has existed for a long time. So if the inheritors hunt down spider totems and then kill them and consume their energy, then the Spider Society is the antithesis of that. They actually worship spider totems. And so while they wouldn't necessarily attack anybody out there who is a quote-unquote villain, they will fight anybody who is considered to be a threat to anybody who's an actual spider person. Now, the other thing about this is that for the Spider Society to be effective, they had what are called hunters, which were basically their soldiers. And they were individuals who were imbued with what was essentially mysticism that gave them the powers of a spider. And that's where Anya Corazon comes from. Initially, it was believed that she was supposed to be a hunter. That ended up changing later on in Marvel Comics. They actually switched it to a new person instead of her. But for a time, she was pretty cool and pretty popular. The overall gist here is that there's all kinds of members of the spider community here. More so than that, you get Billy Braddock, right? So Spider UK, which we've talked about him, we've covered him. Mayday Parker, we covered her. Spider-Ham is here. Like, it's just this enormous coming together of all these different spider characters. Now, here's the thing to understand. Peter Parker doesn't know what's going on with all the different Spider-Man being hunted across the multiverse. He has no idea that's happening. He doesn't even know that like the entire spider army is being assembled. Remember, Peter Parker's just got his body back from when Dr. Octopus had it as Superior Spider-Man. And so where Dr. Octopus, Superior Spider-Man, was assembling this great big huge spider army, this all happened without Peter Parker being aware of what was going on. He initially thinks it's Mysterio, that Mysterio's messing with his head. He's using some kind of trick or something like that to dupe Spider-Man's spider sense and to basically send send all this stuff into disarray and make it look like this kind of thing is going on, which really speaks volumes about the character of Mysterio because he could do it, right? That's just how good he is. Now, of course, this leads to Mayday Parker revealing her identity and basically telling Peter, no, right? Like, we are actually here. It's not some kind of an illusion. You know me, you've met me before, everything's cool. Essentially, we really do have a big thing going on. We need you here, right? And that's when Spider UK is like, you faced the threat before, like, it's Morlun. Like, Morlun is who we have to deal with. Now, where Peter thinks that Morlun is coming back, the response to Spider UK is, no, it's not Morlun who's coming here, it's his brother Deimos. And that's when Peter begins to learn Morlun's got relatives. Remember, up until this point, this moment right here, Peter only thought it was Morlun. He thought that was it, right? Morlun was like just the inheritor, that like Ezekiel Sims, the person who warned Peter Parker about Morlun in the early days of J. Michael Straczynski's run, when all of this really began, if we're being honest with ourselves, that there wasn't really a whole lot of discussion about the extended family of Morlun. It was really just, Morlun is hunting you, Peter, make sure you stay safe because he'll take your energy and kill you, right? That's basically what he'll do. And so it was just kind of Peter fleeing for his life against Morlun, then eventually fighting him, and then killing him a handful of times. And so this is the first time Peter learns that there's actually a huge inheritor family, and there's more than just Morlun, that there's actually other people there. And so the response is, yes, Peter, like, Morlun's brother is coming here, there is a big inheritor family, we have to go. Like, you have to get to this portal, we need to take off as fast as we possibly can. Now, at that point, you switch over to Wundagore Mountain in Eastern Europe, right, the home of the High Evolutionary, and you pick up with Kane. Now, here's the thing about Kane, right? Kane, Ben Reilly, all these guys. So here's the thing about this. So back in the 1990s, and we've actually got these videos covered here on the channel, and they're part of the Spider-Man playlist if you want to check them out after this video. But what you had was a story called the Clone Saga, probably one of the most reviled stories among Spider-Man fans, right? It's one of those where it was just, it was only supposed to be like maybe a 12 or 13 issue series, and they ended up expanding it, and it spanned like 3 years, right? It was just, it ballooned up to being unnecessarily large. But the overall gist here is that Kane and Ben Reilly were clones of Peter Parker that were created by the Jackal. And the idea was to basically screw with the head of Peter to even convince him that he himself was a clone. And so the whole gist behind the story was it was Marvel asking us as the reader, which one of these guys is the actual real Peter Parker? Because you didn't know which one it was. You didn't know if it was Ben Reilly, you didn't know if it was Kane, and you didn't know if it was Peter Parker. Again, that's one of the reasons why it wasn't very well received. But Kane is just kind of here as part of Mount Wundagore, basically keeping all the people here protected, and then he's met by Deimos, who basically begins a process of trying to kill him and consume his energy. Now, as he goes in for the kill against Kane, that's when you end up getting Bruce Banner from Earth 7105, who's not a Hulk, but he is a Spider-Man, the Old Man Spider of Earth 4, whose identity is never given to us, and then a few others. You've of course got Gwen Stacy, Spider-Gwen, who's here as well, and that as they're basically trying to protect Kane and then fight off Deimos, you've got Ben Reilly who steps in. Right now, this is the Spider-Man of Earth 94, so it's not the main Marvel Universe version of Peter Parker. He's been recruited here by the other members of the Spider-Man army, so that's why you have a Ben Reilly here. It's not the Ben Reilly, just a Ben Reilly from an alternate reality. But for the most part, during this whole conflict, Bruce Banner from this alternate reality is killed, right? Or at least his back is broken, so they basically leave him for dead. There's nothing they can do. And in reality, it's not really a kind of coldness that leads them to do that. It's because it's just practicality, right? That if they were to stay there and they were to fight Deimos, they would lose more than just one guy. And so ultimately, it's one of those things where it's like, we can't sacrifice the entire team for just one individual, right? Like, it sucks we got to leave him behind, but we do. And so what you end up getting is all these guys going through this portal and then showing up in Central Park in Earth 13. Now, Earth 13 is probably one of the coolest universes that you don't really get a whole lot of exposition about. Instead, this is the story where Peter Parker never lost the Enigma Force. So back in 1989, well, really December of 1989, running into 1990, Marvel had a story called Acts of Vengeance. And this is basically a story where Loki brought together all the different villains, or at least the most popular villains of Marvel Comics, and then switched around who they were going to fight and had them fight against different heroes. And so during this time, what you had was a manifestation of the Enigma Force. Now, the Enigma Force is exactly what you think it is, right? It's a super powerful force of energy, but we don't really know much about it outside of the fact that it basically comes from the microverse, right? Like literally a microscopic universe inside the main Marvel universe. But the overall gist here is that whenever the Enigma Force appears, it's like the Watcher showing up, right? Like, it's a significant thing. During the Acts of Vengeance storyline, the Enigma Force possessed Spider-Man because it was on the hunt for a person that it needed to possess. And it's one of those things where the Enigma Force does that. It'll appear and then it'll bond to a person and then a successive series of people until it finally settles on a compatible host. Peter Parker happened to be one of those. And it was actually a really cool thing. There was one point where he punched the Incredible Hulk like into space. It was amazing. But basically, Earth 13 is a universe where Peter never lost the Enigma Force, where he basically held on to it, seemingly even all the way up to this point, right? He's just super powerful. Now, one of the things to know is the Enigma Force has been shown to be capable in different capacities over the years, so it's really inconsistent in terms of its power level. But a lot of what's going on here is just hitting Peter Parker exceedingly hard because it's a lot to happen at one time. Basically, in a matter of what we could probably attribute to being 20 minutes or so, he's met all these alternate reality versions of himself, including an animated version of himself who's a pig, right? It's cool to see Ben Reilly again, an alternate reality version of himself that basically never became or never got rid of the Enigma Force. And then while all that's going on, when he's asked the question like why, you know, why am I here, right? Like, why is this whole big thing being assembled? He's told, because the inheritors are here, right? Like, one of the things he's told by Spider-Man from Earth 13 is that because the Enigma Force is part and parcel to a universe, if he were to leave his universe, that he would basically lose the power of the Enigma Force. He would just become a regular Spider-Man. And that's why Earth 13 is a safe haven, because this guy is a cosmic character. And his argument is, if the inheritors were to show up here to this reality, I would obliterate them. It'd be a fool's errand, right? It'd be a suicide mission. And that's why they use this as a safe place. But he says, this battle that's happening, Peter, this war with like all this stuff, the inheritors, we have you here because you're our secret weapon. You're the greatest of us all, right? You're the only one who's ever faced against Morlun and survived. Not only that, actually killed him a couple times. And then beyond that, there's actually a much bigger role that Peter's going to play as part of this great big huge Spider-Verse event. That's when I say the spider totems will be explained. But what we end up doing here is switching over to an alternate reality. It's labeled as Earth 610. For those of you guys who read the original Spider-Verse event, you guys know it's actually 1610. Why does 1610 matter? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this universe is home to what I consider to be the greatest spider character ever made in the history of Marvel Comics, none other than Miles Morales. Yes, it is. And Miles Morales is about to have a very, very terrible experience because as he is mourning the loss of his mother, Rio Morales, because this takes place right when his mom dies, you've immediately got the arrival of Verna and all of her hounds that just come pouring in with the intention of killing Miles, killing this reality's version of Jessica Drew, who's basically a clone of Peter Parker, consuming their energies and walking away. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.